Okay, cheers. I'm going to do this Mackie.
Yeah. Ready?
Yeah, it's on you.
Okay. Hello YouTube. So today we're talking about the subjectivity of values, the first chapter from J.L. Mackie's book Ethics, Inventing Right and Wrong. We have an extract from a collection of philosophy essays called the Norton Introduction to Philosophy, we'll put up a link to the extract. So it's not the whole chapter, but it's some relevant sections.
It's a beginner's selection for an introductory class. So we're going with that because presumably you're beginners.
So
this is an introduction. Well, I also wanted to say we've both received a lot of messages about metaethics and about why anthropology or science can't really answer ethical questions, much less meta-ethical questions. And we felt this selection addressed that very, very well. So we're going to be reading bits of it, but also providing commentary, hopefully in that context. I'm drinking, so
right. Well,
we'll see how it goes.
Also.
Oh, and don't complain about the noise. It's the sound of a waterfall, and you're getting free education. So, I mean, I'm going to enjoy a beer and the sound of a waterfall. I think that's fair, right? That's fair.
Okay, I'm open to constructive criticism, but
we looked all over for a quiet place. This is as quiet as it gets in this party city. Let's do this Mackie.
Okay. So yeah, I don't know. I think that's all we need to say by way of introduction. So I'm just going to name the sections as we go through them. So starting from section 1, moral skepticism. Which
your favorite line in all of philosophy, maybe.
We didn't discuss who should take this line, but
it's a really good line. Why don't you have it, Kane?
There are no objective values. That's how it starts.
J.L. Mackie, thank you. There are no objective values. We're good. You can hand it to me when it's time.
Okay.
So he goes on to clarify what he means by there are no objective values, and you can read from it, or we can describe it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I don't think we need to read from so much here. So I mean, first of all, Mackie just says, look, this doesn't apply only to moral goodness. It applies to moral values and disvalues in general. So he's talking about rightness and wrongness. What is this? Duty, obligation, and actions being rotten and contemptible, and so on. Also non-moral values like beauty and aesthetic merit, but that's a different.
Which is not to say somebody cannot experience beauty. It's to say that the world does not contain beauty as an objective property in it. And likewise, the world does not contain rightness and wrongness as an objective property in it. So when he begins with, there are no objective values, that's what he means. A bold start.
So he then goes on to make a number of clarifications about what exactly his position is. So he says that the view that he's adopting may be called moral skepticism, but this is likely to be misunderstood.
Did I want this?
Trying to keep it collaborative and...
Well, hold my beer.
Yeah.
Moral skepticism might also be used as a name for either of two first-order views. And let us pause for a second here, because there's an important distinction between first-order ethical views and second-order ethical views. Sometimes we call this normative versus meta-ethical. First-order views are going to represent normative views, what you should do. Or what you should do in any given situation. It's going to be stuff like utilitarianism, right? Those sorts of things. These systems that tell you what is right and what is wrong. So that's a first-order view, as Mackie refers to it. So, moral skepticism might also be used as a name for either of two first-order views, or perhaps for an incoherent mixture of the two. A moral skeptic might be the sort of person who says, all this talk of morality is trite. A person who rejects morality will take no notice of it. Such a person may be literally rejecting all moral judgments. He is more likely to be making moral judgments of his own, expressing a positive moral condemnation of all that conventionally passes for morality, semicolon, or he may be confusing these two logically incompatible views and saying that he rejects all morality, while he is in fact rejecting only a particular morality that is current in the society in which he has grown up. So we really like this, because this is...
It's a useful clarification.
I'll
right?
take my word back.
Yeah, when people call themselves moral skeptics, right, there's many different things that might mean. And so on the one hand, there's this view of the person who just doesn't want anything to do with morality, like just says that, well, like as Mackie
YOLO.
puts it,
Fuck it.
all of the talk of morality is just rubbish. We don't need to even bother engaging in moral debate or moral argument. And then there's another view, which is the view of a person who holds moral views, but they are unconventional. So when that person looks at the prevailing morality of their societies, they say, all of that is...
Well, and it's important for them to say that we point out that these people, I think these are the people that concern the Sam Harrises of the world, and our friend Steven, who we've done some videos with, seem deeply concerned with these people who, if they embraced, there are no moral values, it seems a little like actually what they're doing is just taking this positive position of I can do whatever the fuck I want, or for example, because we're both Western, Christianity is immoral, circumcision is immoral, something like that. Now, I'm not actually rejecting morality when I do that. I'm not being a moral skeptic. I'm making a positive moral claim. Christianity is wrong. Circumcision is wrong. These are positive moral claims. And Mackie doesn't want us to confuse his position with that position. Nor does he want us to confuse it with the position that anything's okay. Because, hey, look, if you're saying anything's okay, that is also a moral position. Right? Yeah. So I think that's, I feel good about that. Yeah. You want to move on?
Yeah, okay. Okay. Right. So, by contrast, what I'm discussing is a second order view, a view about the status of moral values and the nature of moral valuing, about where and how they fit into the world. These first and second order views are not really distinct but completely independent.
You mumbled that last bit. Why don't you just own it?
These first and second order views are not merely distinct but completely independent. I'm hoping we'll be able to put up text on the screen, so
we're gonna try.
People will be able to follow. Yes, so this is the distinction between the first order moral positions, where you're making moral claims about what you should or shouldn't do, and then a second order view. And this is what meta-ethics is about, right? When we're doing meta-ethics, we're asking questions about the nature of moral value, the meaning of moral statements, about are these things objective or subjective, and you can hold...
Do right and wrong exist in the world? Are they things? Is that a thing?
Yeah.
Sorry.
You can hold various different positions on that, independently of what specific moral views you hold, first order views you hold. So, somebody might say, I don't know, abortion is wrong, and then they might take that to be an expression of their own personal views and nothing more, or they might take it to be an objective fact in the world.
Like a law written on the universe, almost like a mathematical fact.
Yes.
This excerpt from Mackie doesn't include this line, but Mackie calls... Somebody is playing the oboe horribly, and it's very distracting. I'm just going to put that out there for the world. He asks us to compare the sorts of moral values that he's talking about to mathematical facts. These things that exist mind independently. He calls them partners in crime, right? So when we talk about these second order moral facts in the world, we're not talking about when I'm hold my beer and my beer is a thing in the world. We're talking about a property that exists mind independently. And possibly the best comparison, the one Mackie offers in the full text, is numbers. And I thought that was relevant. Now I can't remember why. Either way, I'm very pleased that I remembered despite the oboe. this partners in crime concept. Oh, because we're talking about whether or not these facts exist in the world. So I think it's important to say neither Kane nor I are thinking that like the Large Hadron Collider is gonna like fart out a rightness or a wrongness. This is why science can't touch it. It's the same reason science can't actually touch mathematics. We don't get our mathematical principles from science. We get them from logic and from math itself. You can run as many experiments as you want, and you can ask everybody on Earth what 2 + 2 adds up to, and we could all agree that it adds up to 24. But either we'd be plussing incorrectly, or we'd just be wrong. Our judgments, taking some kind of empirical information about what people think about something, like math, doesn't change the fact of the matter about it. And likewise, when we're talking about objective morality in the world, we're talking about something that empiricism just isn't going to help with. Surveying people isn't going to help with. So we're not looking for physical property, we're looking for something much more like mathematics. I feel like that was important. Maybe you feel like that was a rant.
I'm not sure what the point was, to be completely honest.
Look, it's second order. It's second order. I just wanted to clarify. Thanks a lot, Kane.
Sorry.
Let's move on.
Okay.
You can reiterate what you had said before my rant. I warned you there would be rants.
I think said what needed to be said there. So that's section 1. All right, section 2, subjectivism. So here Mackie, again, he's just clarifying his position, right? He says, another name used as an alternative to moral scepticism for the view I am discussing is subjectivism. I don't know if there was much that you wanted to say about this section, but there are a number of different views that people might take about the meaning of moral statements. And one view that sometimes goes by the name of subjectivism is that all that we're really doing when we make moral statements, all those statements really mean, is that we're just expressing approval or disapproval, or we're just expressing our own attitudes. So to say abortion is wrong just means I disapprove of abortion, or something like that.
Or all those vegans who had very strong feelings about not drinking beer. Right?
Right.
Yeah, so we take drinking beer is wrong. Destroying your body with beer is wrong. Is something quite a few people said. I notice you're not enjoying your pina colada.
I am
mighty moralist of you. So they might be just expressing personal disapproval, like beer, yuck, doing things that are slightly unhealthy, ew. Right? That's one way to take it. We're used to call it subjectivism.
Yeah.
And then.
So yeah, what is often called moral subjectivism is the doctrine that, for example, this action is right means I approve of this action. And yeah, so the point here is just this is not the position that Mackie is going to defend. So I don't know.
Yeah, let's take a look at it. The oboe's back. It's nice. But the view I am now discussing is to be distinguished in two vital respects from any such doctrine as this. First, what I have called moral skepticism is a negative doctrine, and I want to return to that, not a positive one. It says what there isn't, not what there is. It says that there do not exist any entities or relations of a certain kind, objective values or requirements, which many people have believed to exist. So, the reason I want to return to the negative and positive is, first of all, if this is your first interaction with philosophy, you may take negative and positive to mean like, positive, fuck yeah, negative, boo. That's not what we use those terms to mean philosophically. A negative view is an absence. It's a claim of absence. So this is going to be a lot like negative liberties for people who are a bit political versus positive liberties. Some people would put those in terms of freedoms versus obligations, right? In terms of bioethics, we have negative and positive euthanasia. Can I even say that on your channel? I don't know. One, positive means you're taking an active action. Negative means you're doing nothing. You're just kind of letting nature run its course. So in this case, when he asserts that this is a negative doctrine, he's saying he's not making any positive claims, ontological or otherwise. He's simply saying what is not the case. It's a negation. The whole thing is a negation. Is that good?
Yeah.
Nothing to add?
Yeah, and okay, and then the second point is that so the view that he's calling moral skepticism, he says, is not a linguistic or conceptual view. It's specifically a claim about ontology. Right, the world does not contain certain things. It does not contain moral values or objective moral values.
Absent
right?
Moral values. Well, objective moral values.
Yeah, the denial that there are objective values does not commit one to any particular view about what moral statements mean, and certainly not to the view that they are equivalent to subjective reports. So we can hold that when we make moral statements, we are trying to describe objective facts in the world. So we're not just expressing personal opinions.
We're not just yucking or yumming things.
Like, we're trying to describe the way the world is. But Mackie's going to say that it is not that way.
Can I please give an example without you calling it pedantic?
Yes.
So the linguistic question is a part of
Before you do
metaethics. Yes.
Can I just clarify something? Because I feel this is important
No.
for everybody.
Yes.
I won't then.
Yes.
I have in the past used the term pedantic, right, honestly, genuinely unaware of the fact that this had certain negative connotations. And in particular, it has connotations of arrogance or, wait, what was it?
Like almost pretense.
Pretense, yeah, like pretentiousness. I didn't know that. I thought pedantic was like nitpicking, basically, which maybe is a bit negative, but it's something I do as well. So if I have ever accused somebody
like
of
that time
pedantry,
you definitely accused me.
it wasn't meant as an accusation of arrogance or pretentiousness.
Thank you. So, the linguistic question within metaethics interests me a lot, but he's clarifying that he's not particularly interested, and I do think it would be beneficial to take a brief moment to say what the linguistic question is that he's referring to. So we've noticed this thing about sentence structure. The beer is in my hands. This is propositional, yes? We'll note it is either true or false. Currently, it is true. The beer is indeed in my hand. So we've got the sentence, the beer is in my hand. Let's construct a similar sentence. Polyamory is wrong. Structurally, those sentences appear to be doing the same thing. They appear to be trying to report on reality. So, hold my beer. Now the sentence, the beer is in my hand, is false, right? Because the contents of reality have changed. Don't shake my... Who shakes a woman's beer? Now the sentence, the beer is in my hand, as a proposition about the contents of the world, is false. Now it appears when somebody says polyamory is wrong, they are also, because of the raw sentence structure of it, we don't know what else to do with it, other than to think of it as a claim about the contents of the world. Polyamory has wrongness in it.
It seems to be attributing a property or a characteristic or a feature to
the
a
world.
particular action in the world.
So that would be, if that were true or false, well, if that were true, then objective morality would exist, right? In the same way, there's an objective fact of the matter about the location of my beer in the world. So there is some debate about whether or not we should take moral claims to be propositional at all. Maybe people are just accidentally constructing these sentences that in actuality make them feel that when really they're just trying to say polyamory. Yeah, I don't want it. That's too many dicks on the dance floor. I don't know. So some emotive expression. Or they could be trying to report on reality. Mackie's not going to concern himself with that, but because this is introductory, I felt we should clarify. Thanks for shaking up my beer. That was wrong.
I mean, Mackie does take a position.
Well, he takes my position,
Yeah.
which is now your position.
Well, it is now. But
Yeah.
so yeah, in some ways, like the first question that one might ask when doing meta-ethics is, okay, well, what do these statements mean, right? Like, what exactly are we doing when we make moral statements?
Are we trying to describe reality?
Yeah.
Or
So, on the one hand, there is the view that when we make moral statements, we're saying things that can be true or false. And then there are some people who will say that no, like moral statements, although they have the same grammatical structure as propositions, such as the beer is in my hand, that's not really what they mean. So that
they actually mean something different. And there's a whole host of views of what they could mean. But Kane, myself, and Mackie take them as propositional. That's why this view is called error theory, because they're all wrong. Anyway, let's move on. I kind of jumped the shark there. I'm sorry.
okay, so we then come to section 4. Is objectivity a real issue?
A very sexy section.
So the claim that Mackie is going to make here is that within the tradition of philosophy, and not just within philosophy but also within colloquial language, right, there is an assumption that moral values are both prescriptive and objective. So it says, and I quote, values themselves have been seen as at once prescriptive and objective. So yeah, I suppose we've kind of clarified already the issue about objectivity.
That would mean it exists mind independently in the world, just like numbers. Maybe not physically.
Well, maybe let's not
objectively.
commit ourselves to the objective existence of numbers. I mean, you can if you want, but I'm not going to go
It's
there.
his example. It's just not in this excerpt.
I'm not.
Mackie commits himself to it.
Anyway,
Go on.
yeah. So prescriptive and objective. So then this notion of prescriptivity is that the idea of moral values is that they tell you not just how the world is, but how it ought to be. So, like, you know, I can say that this shirt is pink. I mean, it's not entirely pink, but you can see there's pink on it. And
I like that example, but I think I've got a better one.
okay, go ahead.
So, beer causes liver damage. Pina coladas cause liver damage. These are facts. We don't deny these facts. Prescriptivity would say you can take from that fact that delicious pina colada, which I hope you're enjoying, and my cerveza, cause liver damage and derive a prescription, something about what we should do. Presumably not consume these tasty beverages. So, prescriptivity jumps that is-ought gap that we've discussed many, many times, right? It says you can take a fact about the world, and because it contains this objective rightness or wrongness, you can derive some sort of should type action from it, whether you should or shouldn't from it. I can tell you're uncomfortable.
I mean, to me, I would say that it just is the shouldness or oughtness, rather than playing about deriving shouldness or.
Okay, it's just in there, somewhere in the statement.
But I mean, the distinction
I feel
is.
like this is an advertisement for
Like-
Tecate. I'm gonna roll it away.
Beer causes liver damage. I mean, we're just describing something that happens in
So
the
that
world
is true.
when people drink beer, right? Like this is. But then, if I was to say that you ought not to drink beer because it causes liver damage, I'm making a prescriptive claim. I'm saying how you ought to act, how the world ought to be. That the world ought not to contain people drinking lots of beer.
And nobody has a doubt that we can make these basic sort of descriptions of the world, like drinking causes liver damage. Well, drinking alcohol causes liver damage. That's not in question. But how exactly we get a prescription from that, what we should do with our behavior from that, is quite a different matter entirely. So that's that bit clarified.
I don't know if you wanted to say something about Plato's thing.
Oh yes.
I know you were quite keen on
Wait, no,
section.
this. I don't know that this was the section. Let me see.
Well, Mackie's just going to
Yes,
give
actually-
some. So at this point, he just gives some examples of philosophers who have committed themselves to both the prescriptivity and the objectivity of moral values.
So, I think that he does more than that, though.
Okay.
So we have this tradition, and it's something I noticed and took great issue with. When I took my first ethics class, it was a first order ethics class. It was a normative ethics class. I learned about Kant and deontology, and I learned about consequentialism and Bentham and Mill and utilitarianism, and even Aristotelian virtue ethics and so on and so forth, the feminist care ethic. Learned all manner of these things. And the whole time I was thinking, it's really weird that you guys assume that you're just making all these claims about what's right and what's wrong. Where is that coming from? Right? And I think why Mackie mentions this is because we do have this kind of tradition beginning at the beginning of philosophy of just going with it, right? And that's problematic. Whenever we make that assumption, Descartes pointed out another assumption that we made that was quite problematic, which was that the external world existed, or that anything existed, and overturned all of philosophy by saying, hey, hold on a second, it's a pretty big assumption you're making there. And while, personally I feel like it's okay, we can assume the objective external world exists. It's great that he pointed that out and spawned a whole new sort of inquiry from it. Likewise, we've done this with objective morality. And I'm going to read quite a bit here, because it is very sassy. Don't kick my tripod.
Nowhere close to the tripod.
In Plato's theory of the forms, which is dumb as shit, in case and you agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is, don't bother looking it up. It's dumb as shit.
Maybe that's not something we should say.
No, Plato's theory of the form is dumb as shit. It's so dumb. He thinks there's a realm. It's dumb. It's dumb. In Plato's theory of the forms, and in particular the form of the good, are eternal, extramental realities. They're a very central structural element in the fabric of the world. But it is held also that just knowing them or seeing them will not merely tell men what to do, but will ensure that they do it, overruling any contrary inclinations. Right? Like, you see this form of the good. I don't know. It seems like some Gundam shit to me. I don't know. You see this form of the good, and just any inclination you had to do otherwise. So I see that drinking is bad, and suddenly I don't want to drink anymore. That's what Plato expects to have happen. Although, as I understand it, he quite enjoyed drinking, so maybe not. Overruling any contrary inclination. The philosopher kings in the Republic can, Plato thinks, be trusted with unchecked power because their education will have given them knowledge of the forms. Being acquainted with the forms, and acquaintanceship here is just knowing of them, being acquainted with the forms of the good and justice and beauty and the rest, they will, by this knowledge alone, without any further motivation, be impelled to pursue and promote these ideals. Which is pretty fucking stupid. It's surprising. I dated a fellow once who asked me about a certain behavior of mine, and I said, well, I can know that it's wrong and still choose to do it. And I think a lot of people don't address that. You don't have to believe something is right or wrong in order to engage in that activity. But this is the part I really like, because we don't stop with Plato. This carries on for quite some time. And I quote, "Similarly, Kant believes that pure reason can by itself be practical, though he does not pretend to be able to explain how it can be so." And what he's pointing out here is Kant seemed to believe that once we checked his principle of universalizability and all the others, we would just know what was right to do and would do it. We couldn't possibly do otherwise once we had this knowledge. And it's insane to me that most of philosophy has just accepted this assumption. And I think when people argue normative ethics today, they're kind of making that assumption too, right? Like, if you sit down and you really argue about whether or not abortion is right or wrong, your expectation at the end of it is that having proved objectively abortion is right or wrong, this person suddenly changes. Oh my God, they just instantly, everything, they're on board with you. Or once you've proven that setting dogs on fire is wrong, there's objective wrongness in the world and that's wrong to do, no longer will you tolerate setting dogs on fire. But as it turns out, it's surprising that we spent so long thinking this was the case, because I think most of us know that that's kind of bullshit. We do things that we may believe, if we're moral realists, are wrong all the time. How have we let this go unnoticed or unaddressed for nearly 2,000 years? It's crazy. Anyway, that's my rant. I'm going to open another beer. I believe I have one. No. Yes. No. Yes.
Okay.
How would that fucking work?
Well,
Just like, oh, this is wrong. The desire to do it's gone.
right.
It's fucking crazy. Sorry.
So, section 7, the claim to objectivity. What?
I'm so sassy.
Yeah, I thought we were going to talk about this later, and
Maybe,
so I don't know
know.
whether to.
We can,
We don't
let's
agree on
do-
this point, and I don't know
Well,
whether to.
okay. No, I just told you I wanted to read the cons.
Okay.
Sassiness, which you enjoy as well.
The claim to objectivity. As I've said, the main tradition of European moral philosophy includes the claim that there are objective values of just the sort I have denied. And then at this point, he basically gives some further examples of philosophers who have held that values are prescriptive and objective in his sense.
Meaning they force you to follow them, and they are real things in the world. What is your problem with this?
Sorry.
What is it? That's not what prescriptive means?
I don't agree
How
with
did we not chat about this earlier?
We did chat about it earlier. I don't agree that the notion of objective prescriptive values involves the idea that it forces, in a sense, of psychological compulsion.
That is Mackie's assertion, though.
I know, and I said that I felt he was overplaying his hand.
Okay, so I'm not stating...
I'm not saying that you're wrong
I'm
about
not
what he
stating
says.
an uncontroversial view.
No,
I'm
this is what he
clarifying
says.
Mackie.
Yeah, I agree.
So you're good.
I agree that that is what Mackie claims. Yeah.
Good.
But it's just, you weren't just clarifying Mackie, you were also...
I was clarifying
Maybe you were just
Mackie.
clarifying Mackie.
Yeah.
Okay.
Slow your roll. Have a pina colada.
Okay. So, the point of this, the relevant point, I think, of the claim to objectivity section is that Mackie thinks that it's not just a product of philosophical argument, it's not just some ivory tower kind of product of philosophical analysis, right? This claim to objectivity, right, the idea that moral values are prescriptive and objective, that's built into our ordinary thought and talk. It's built into the ordinary meaning of moral terms. So actually, although Mackie has clarified that his moral scepticism is just a rejection of objective values, it's not a linguistic thesis, he does actually also make
He is taking a
claim.
position on the linguistic claim. So again, to reiterate,
Yeah.
drinking causes liver problems, drinking is wrong. Mackie here is taking the position that, of course, there's an assumption in here of objective morality. This is just how we talk.
Right. So when people make moral claims, when people say things like polyamory is wrong, there's a presupposition that polyamory has an objective property of wrongness. And of course Mackie's claim is, well, it doesn't. And so this is where the phrase error theory comes from, right? Our ordinary moral discourse presupposes a massive error, right? It presupposes that there are these objective values or objective prescriptions, and that's just not true.
So every time you make a moral statement, we're making an error.
Yeah, so as an example of this, Mackie says, someone in a state of moral perplexity, wondering whether it would be wrong for him to engage in, say, research related to bacteriological warfare, wants to arrive at some judgment about this concrete case, is doing this work at this time in these actual circumstances. The question is not, for example, whether he really wants to do the work, whether it will satisfy or dissatisfy him, whether he will in the long run have a pro-attitude towards it, or even whether this is an action of a sort that he can happily and sincerely recommend in all relevantly similar cases. Nor is he even wondering just whether to recommend such action in all relevantly similar cases. He wants to know whether this course of action would be wrong in itself. And this is just the sort of thing that happens when we engage in these moral debates. Mackie thinks that, like, even on an everyday basis, even when you look outside of professional philosophy,
And even internally, not necessarily a debate with another human being, when you're trying to decide whether or not to engage in an activity based on the rightness or wrongness of it, you're not asking, will this be a fun time, right? Or any of the other things he enumerates. You're asking, do you like that?
Yeah.
You're asking about the activity itself, which he takes to mean, are people having sex very loudly?
There's a lot of noises happening around us. I don't know whether that's being picked up. Yeah.
That would be interesting to find out. We're not asking a psychological question of ourselves. We're asking whether or not the act itself contains rightness or wrongness, permissibility or impermissibility, which of course presumes the objectivity of values.
So, I mean, this is a very important point because, I think that, certainly I've encountered this, right? When people describe themselves as moral realists, right? It seems like, and I think this is perhaps what motivates people like Sam Harris and those who find it persuasive. It seems like, there's an objective fact of the matter about what's pleasurable and what's painful, and I don't like
I feel like
pain.
I'm very confused about the objective fact of the matter about what I'm hearing.
I don't know whether that's pleasure
Wow.
or pain, but there's an objective fact of the matter about it, right? Somebody is experiencing either a lot of pleasure or a lot of pain.
I feel
right
like
now.
they're minimally two somebodies.
Right, okay. So, yes. There's states of pleasure and pain, and of course,
We can
those
measure
are,
that scientifically. We could ask them about it if we were weirdos.
there
We're
are
not going
objective
to.
measures of it. And, I can say, okay, I don't like this. This isn't something that I personally want to experience. When we think about when we think about questions in moral terms, right, Mackie thinks there's more going on than just that. When I say that polyamory is wrong, right, it's not just a question of whether it promotes pleasure, even though that might be part of how we think about it morally. There's more involved, and that more is this idea of an objective prescription.
For example, what we just heard, we could ask these people, we could conduct a survey, we could be very scientific about it, and say, hey, was that pleasure or pain that we heard just now? And we could get answers to that, but that wouldn't tell us whether what we just heard in itself was right or wrong. And it seems like when we're asking moral questions of the world, we're not just asking how we would feel about them or how other people would feel about them. We're asking about the thing in itself. and oh my god, it's still happening. Okay, let's move on.
Okay.
I thought it would stop.
Yes. So, Mackie thinks he's established that there's this claim to objectivity in our ordinary discourse, and then he goes on to say, this isn't something that we can just take for granted, right? Like, we can't, having identified this is something that should be open to question, right? The claim to objectivity, however ingrained in our language and thought, is not self-validating. It can and should be questioned. So yeah, and there's, an important point here about, I think philosophy in general, which is, it's certainly important to ask questions about the meaning of moral statements, about what it is that people are doing when they engage in this discourse. But then there's still a further question about what is the world actually like, right?
Which is what we're supposed to be doing.
And that's probably what people are interested in, when they think about this stuff. I don't know.
I think that is the essence of what the best philosophy does, is it identifies these assumptions. We talked about Gettier earlier with justified true belief. Something that we just went along with for, again, 2,000 years. And one fellow came along and wrote a 2.5-page paper, and he was like, hey, actually, that doesn't seem to work out. And so many theories have come out of that, and so much discourse has come out of that, and whether or not you find that productive is whatever. I'm happy to say that's subjective. But I see our job as finding these assumptions that we've erroneously made, like there is objective morality in the world, and saying, hey, what are you basing that on? There's prescription built into the world. What are you basing that on? Where is that idea coming from? And can you ground it in something other than some strong feels? And challenging that. So it's not self-validating. The idea that there's a fact of the matter about setting a puppy on fire, or that screeching we heard, or abortion, or my beers. Even though we talk like this and have talked like this, it seems for most of human history, we've taken something for granted, which is that objective morality exists. We found it, now let's challenge it. Is that good?
I think so.
I tend to beat a dead horse.
Right.
Is this one that I laid claim to?
No,
we did want to talk about this.
So,
there is another chapter. I'm not going to quote from it.
Right.
That I know of.
Okay. So, so far, Mackie has really just been trying to specify exactly what his position actually is. And I don't know, it might be worth just summarising it quickly, right? His claim is, right, that the ordinary moral discourse involves his claim to objectivity. It involves the assumption that there are objective values. And he denies this. He says there are none. And hopefully, we have now distinguished that appropriately from various other positions.
He's also clarified, that he is not taking a position, a positive position that you can do whatever the fuck you want, for example, nor is he taking a relativistic position that what is right is whatever a culture or an individual thinks of it. He's taking a purely negative position.
In fact, Mackie would explicitly deny the relativist position. So, a relativist would say something like, polyamory is wrong, is true or false, depending on what culture you're in. In our culture, presumably polyamory is wrong is true, because...
And in 50 years, maybe not.
Yeah. Maybe that's changing.
We don't know how that happens.
But you can find cultures around the world where polyamory has been accepted. A relativist, a moral relativist, would look at that and say, okay...
Well, fact of the matter about it.
The fact of the matter is, right, it is a fact that in Western society polyamory is wrong, whereas in, I don't know, the Tiwi culture of wherever they were from, I'm forgetting. But
do you have a list of cultures that are down with polyamory?
I'm sure somebody could find the list, and I'm pretty sure the Tiwi would be on them.
Okay.
But anyway, in that culture, it's true that polyamory, it's false that polyamory is wrong, right?
And this is a fact in the world.
But Mackie thinks that actually that doesn't really describe how moral discourse works. That really, when we make moral claims, and I mean Mackie doesn't use this example, but I think he'd probably be okay with me saying that. Look, if I was to
we can
argue,
ask him. Is he still kicking around?
No,
He's not.
He's dead.
He's dead.
But I think that look, he would probably say, yeah, if I was to argue with somebody from Tiwi culture about the rightness of polyamory, about the moral status of polyamory, the assumption that we would both be making in that argument is that there's a fact of the matter that's independent of what both of us think or what both of our social conventions claim to be the case. I mean, this is the assumption that moral values are mind independent, and not like mind independent and culturally independent. The assumption that when I say that slavery is wrong, I'm assuming that that is a fact of the matter in the world, and that the people in previous cultures who all accepted slavery were just mistaken. Yeah?
That was a weird thing that you just did, and I feel like it might be confusing, but that's fine. Because relativism would say that, colonial Americans, who the majority of whom were down with slavery before abolitionists, would say, well, enslaving this certain kind of person is perfectly morally acceptable, and they'd cite the Bible as evidence of that. And relativism would say they were right. That in that context, they were right. Mackie wants to distinguish himself from that. He is not saying that. That is a kind of objective, right? Because that means there is a fact of the matter about what is right and what is wrong. So that's what he's done up until now. Now he's going to pull out the big guns.
I'm not sure how that's different to what I said.
I feel like you just didn't clarify that was relativism.
Okay. Right. So that's Mackie's position. And now he's going to present the arguments for it. So,
Alright, so there are two.
Right, he gives two.
One's not his.
We begin with what he calls the argument from relativity. I think probably more commonly would these days be called the argument from disagreement. And Mackie himself says that this is not, well, he doesn't take this to be a particularly compelling argument, though he clearly thinks that it forms at least part of the case. But this isn't really where he doesn't want to put all his eggs in this basket, let's say.
And nor do we, but it is worth discussing.
Yeah.
So the argument from disagreement essentially identifies this fact. There is a lot of disagreement about what is right and what is wrong in the world. Were we to try to figure out empirically what is right or what is wrong, objectively, in some cases maybe we could reach some kind of consensus, but in many, many, many cases, no consensus could be found. So there's a lot of disagreement about this. For example, Abraham Lincoln was like, slavery is wrong. And he made this claim full well knowing that a very large portion of my tragic country disagreed with him about that. And maybe he still disagrees with him about that. I don't know. I'm not feeling great about my country right now. But it just points to the fact that there is a lot of moral disagreement. And unlike other areas of disagreement, where empirical science or research can really help us out and bring us toward consensus, like global warming, for example, morality doesn't ever seem to really settle on any sort of consensus about what's right or wrong. You would expect if it were objective in the world and you could find it scientifically, or it could be proved empirically, that it would look a lot more like science. Like, all right, well, you've got your hypothesis about rightness or wrongness, test it out, you try it, and other specialists in this field say like, shit, that works. Or they say, no, I don't know, that doesn't work, let's do some more tests. And eventually you settle on some sort of consensus. That has never happened with morality. And that's significant because if this is an objective fact in the world that we have access to, that we can know about and make claims about, we should be able to reach some sort of consensus, especially among specialists. And yet we never have.
So,
that's the argument from disagreement.
An important point here is that Mackie certainly isn't saying, and I don't think any error theorist would want to say, that it's just the fact of disagreement that supports the error theoretic position, right?
That's why we don't put our eggs in that basket.
So yeah, like we do find when we look at the world a lot of disagreement in moral codes. Different societies clearly have different moral codes. That's obvious. Now Mackie makes his point. He says, look, this variation is in itself merely a truth of descriptive morality, a fact of anthropology, which entails neither first order nor second order ethical views. So the mere fact that there is disagreement, that just in itself doesn't really tell us anything.
I mean, it's definitely true.
But
it's descriptive in the same way the beer is in my hand is descriptively true. And yet there's no prescription we can derive from that. So it's not wrong to point out that different cultures have different values. It's not inaccurate to point out that different cultures have different values, but to derive more than that descriptive fact from that observation, that anthropological observation, would be to assume too much.
Yeah, so, and Mackie also points out, look, we can find disagreement on a whole load of other topics as well. If you look at different cosmologies, I mean, Hindu cosmology, for example, I don't actually know it in enough detail to say anything about it, but I assume that it's radically different from the kind of cosmological views that are asserted in contemporary Western science.
I'm just thinking, holy shit, there are actual flat earthers
Flat
out there.
earthers, right?
They're like
flat earthers.
Some of them have sent me some very angry emails.
Don't. I think there are. I mean,
There's
is
like
it
a
Hinduism that
society.
has
reincarnation
and stuff like that?
Yeah,
like
and maybe Kafka as well.
levels
I'm
of
not
reality
sure.
and all that. So okay, we look at the world and we find an enormous amount of disagreement about questions of cosmology, but we still think there are objective facts about the way the universe is structured. Many of you probably take it that it is a fact of the matter that the Big Bang occurred. So,
or
in
that
that
we're
case,
on an arm of the galaxy that is the Milky Way.
So, okay, in that case we find disagreement, but that doesn't really seem to undermine our own beliefs. I mean, like, the mere fact that people disagree with the Big Bang model doesn't in itself tell against the Big Bang model. So, similarly with morality, the mere fact that some people think that abortion is wrong, why should that in any way challenge my view that abortion is acceptable, right? So what Mackie says is, okay, look, yes, we find disagreement in these other fields, but, and I quote, such scientific disagreement results from speculative inferences or explanatory hypotheses based on inadequate evidence, and it is hardly plausible to interpret moral disagreement in the same way. Disagreement about moral codes seems to reflect people's adherence to and participation in different ways of life. So it seems like he's making a kind of inference to the best explanation, right? Like, he's identified these phenomena in the world, right? So there's disagreement about scientific questions, disagreement about moral questions, and then the question is, all right, how do we explain that disagreement? In the case of science, we explain that disagreement based on the fact that the evidence we have is relatively poor, or that we're making, as he says, speculative inferences.
The disagreement happens on this level where it's like, okay, well, we just need to know more, or investigate this differently, and eventually some consensus will be arrived at.
Yeah.
Whereas conversely with morality,
well, with morality,
what are you going to look at?
How do we explain moral disagreement? And it seems like at least in many cases, we would explain it by appealing to things such as the just different ways of life, different social circumstances in which people were brought up. So he gives this example of monogamy. I've already used
we've used
monogamy and
we've used
polyamory
polyamory.
with the Tiwi. It seems like people disagree on that just because they participate in these different ways of life. And you could probably give some anthropological explanation for why the Tiwi developed polyamory and why Western society has developed monogamy.
But again, all of this is descriptive, not prescriptive.
And the point of that then is that, well, that's going to account for why people hold the moral views that they do. Rather than it being a response to objective facts of the matter in the world.
I kind of want to be a bitch because this is the point at which you say, like, okay, cool, Sam Harris, or whomever, you surveyed the world. You asked everybody what they thought, you measured their pleasure and pain about these things. Like, maybe you're in a culture that is very monogamous and you imagine your partner sleeping with somebody else or asking to sleep with somebody else, and that causes you a great deal of pain, and we can measure that psychologically. You still haven't told us anything about the moral status of that. You've just described your personal mental state when confronted with the concept of polyamory. So it can be descriptively true that you would find that unpleasant, but that doesn't grant it any prescriptive power or objective status.
I do think it's worth pointing. So, I mean, just because you use the Sam Harris example.
I'm sorry, I really dislike that guy.
I know, but I know
He's
what's
super
going
racist.
to happen now is that
Sorry.
people are going to say, well, it's a matter of looking at what promotes well-being, what promotes pleasure and pain, right?
But that is exactly what I spoke about,
Yeah,
right?
but-
like, so that we're both from a Western society, and perhaps the idea of a partner asking for other partners would cause us a great deal of pain, right? That's a descriptive fact. That doesn't tell us that it's wrong. That would be insane, I think. And I think polyamory is a great example here because we can recognize that, yes, that might cause us pain, that might cause us suffering to have a partner who, in all the appropriate ways, ask for polyamory would cause us some distress. We can measure that. Maybe we'll get to a point where science can measure that. But why we would assume that tells us whether it's right or wrong, that seems very naive and very simplistic to me. To make a claim that polyamory then is in and of itself wrong in this context because it caused one person distress. There's no way to sit in this chair comfortably. Okay. This chair is objectively wrong.
Okay. So, I don't know, Mackie does have more to say about the argument and disagreement.
He doesn't feel like it's not a closing hand. It doesn't finish it, but it is worth noting that if this were something we could study scientifically, it's pretty odd that we haven't actually discovered anything about it. And have not come to any sort of consensus over 2,000 years.
Okay.
We have this much beer left, so let's do it. Let's finish Mackie.
Right. So, argument and disagreement. He now moves on to his second argument, which he takes to be the
This is
big
his
one. He's bringing out the big
OG.
guns here.
His OG shit.
Yeah.
This is original to Mackie,
And this is the argument for queerness.
which is chapter 9, I believe.
Well, section 9.
Section 9.
Section 9.
My bad.
I don't know whether you want to take this or should I take it.
Let me look. Let me get a gander at this bitch. Oh, all right. So, we've highlighted what we wanted to make sure to read, and Mackie puts forth his argument from queerness, and I do want to point out because I have had people misunderstand. Queerness, when Mackie wrote this, just meant weirdness, differentness. That's how it was used colloquially. Like just fucking strange. And I love that people have taken it back. So, but in this context, queerness means it would just be very, very weird. This argument has two parts. One metaphysical, the other epistemological. If there were objective values, then they would be entities or qualities or relations of a very strange sort, utterly different from anything else in the universe. Let that settle with you. So there are these objective values. Maybe they're kind of like math, maybe not. But they'd be entities or qualities or relations of a very strange sort. They're not like my beer. They're not even like the Higgs boson. We wouldn't even begin to know how to measure them, right? Different from anything else in the universe. Correspondingly, if we were aware of them, which we would need to be in order to make moral claims, if we were aware of them, it would have to be by some special faculty of moral perception or intuition, utterly different from our ordinary ways of knowing everything else. So we've got these ways of knowing things, right? We can do math about it. We love doing, so that's what we do. But also, I can know about things by touching them. I can know about things by smelling them. I can know about things by measuring them comparatively or weighing them. I can know about them by looking at them, right? These are the ways we have knowing about things. But what special faculty, what part of us, what ability would we have to know about these moral properties that objectively exist, right? And this is where the argument from disagreement really gets to me, where I think it really, he doesn't mention it here, but if we had this special faculty, it'd be very strange that we would disagree on it, because this would be something as basic as, like, how much beer was in my bottle, right? We have some faculty to look at it, and we can tell not much, right? And we can measure it objectively, right? We have these ways of doing things, and it's not clear exactly what special way we would have of getting at this non-physical, incorporeal, immeasurable, massively debatable objective value. So that's the argument from queerness summarized, but there's a lot more we want to say here, I think.
Yeah. So just to be clear, I mean, really, it says the argument for queerness. There's two arguments. There's a metaphysical argument, these things are just weird, and then the epistemological.
How the fuck do we know
how
about
do we
these
know
things?
about them?
I'm swearing a lot again.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, I think that, so to take these points one at a time, you know, actually Mackie doesn't present this in the way that I was thinking of it.
No,
he doesn't. He just sort of...
He drags Plato again,
Right,
and
yeah.
Kant, which is nice. You should read it. It's hilarious.
Yeah, so this is more about the epistemological point. Of course, the suggestion that moral judgments are made or moral problems solved by just sitting down and having an ethical intuition is a travesty of actual moral thinking. But however complex the real process, it will require, if it is to yield authoritatively prescriptive conclusions, some input of this distinctive sort, either premises or forms of argument, or both.
I was just making sure you didn't step on the bit that I claimed. Which is the bit that comes immediately after.
I think that might have been... Oh,
No, you're good. Unpack it.
okay, I didn't have anything to say about that. I think that was the bit that you claimed.
Really? No, I claimed the later bit. No, there's a lot to say here, right? Essentially, I mean, let's just put it in plain English, because he was writing in, like, what, fucking 1902 or some such?
Like 1970.
1970 or some such?
That's not so long ago. What was it, like?
Look, philosophers are very wordy. We were talking about more the other day, and like just laughing reading it. So I wish you had emphasized that saying, "Oh, I just have an ethical intuition," is an actual travesty of thinking. That's not okay. That's not going to cut it. When asked, like, well, how do you know that? yes, try to appeal to science. Well, you're going to fall into the disagreement pit hole. And how the fuck did you measure that? And it seems like actually you're just measuring somebody's personal preference. Or you're going to have to appeal to this intuition. I just know it. I just know that polyamory is wrong. And he calls that a travesty of thinking.
I mean, I don't know if this is maybe a better example or maybe this misses the point, but think of something like setting a baby on fire, and the baby is screaming in pain, right? And like, so, okay, many of us would look at that and respond very strongly, have a very strong emotional response to seeing a baby being tortured, right? I think this is a good example because like, pretty much all of us will have that, and that's a kind of, you know, moral intuition, right? We look at it and we just say,
I feel
wrong,
ways about
right?
this. They're very loud inside me.
And I think the question is like, okay, but how does that actually justify anything about a claim about how the, you know, how the world is, right? Why should we think that there's somehow wrongness like built into this action, that like this action ought not to be done?
When we're just looking at ourselves and basing it entirely on that, and that's what he means by moral intuition. You see this horrific act of a baby being set on fire, and you have a very strong reaction to it, and you take for granted that that is your magical faculty of moral intuition somehow asserting itself. But that's a big assumption. In fact, that is a travesty of thinking.
When we think about the moral arguments that people make, I guess Mackie might want to say this. I mean, it looks like ultimately, right, those arguments are going to have to rest on these kinds of intuitions, because we can have very sophisticated arguments, right? We can, we might be arguing about the moral status of, I don't know, a new tax policy, right? And so this can appeal to all sorts of empirical data, but ultimately, like what ultimately justifies the position we take is, maybe I think that this policy is going to promote welfare, which will promote pleasure. Maybe I'm a utilitarian, right? So I'm ultimately relying on this intuition that pleasure is good and pain is bad.
And maybe I'm hella deontological, and I'm like, no, that's taxation is theft.
Yeah. Like you have
and
a
it's
property
always
right.
wrong.
You have a property right.
It doesn't matter if it would make more people happy. You are making people slaves.
So when
when
somebody claims that they have a property right, like ownership over, let's say, this bottle, right? Like,
nobody wants that bottle. It's empty.
I know nobody wants it, but it is your bottle, okay? If I was to take this,
it.
okay, fine, it's my bottle. This is my bottle. I have an ownership right over it, and so if somebody was to take it from me, right, like that would be wrong. Again, where does the ownership come from? Where does the wrongness of somebody taking it come
business?
from? It looks like that ultimately rests on intuition. That seems to be Mackie's point.
And the reason it's a travesty is that you're essentially just saying, I feel ways about this. And that's what you're going to have to appeal to once you recognize that there is no empirical way to measure more than how people feel about things. And you can aggregate that, but still all you have is how people feel about things. So he goes on to say, when we ask the awkward question, how we can be aware of this authoritative prescriptivity of the truth of these distinctively ethical premises, or of the cogency of this distinctively ethical pattern of reasoning, none of our ordinary accounts of sensory perception, and I saw it, I tasted it, I smelled it, sensory perception, or introspection, I thought about it a whole lot, or the framing and confirming of explanatory hypotheses, I did it in the fucking lab, or inference, right, like inductive reasoning is not going to help us here, or logical construction, or conceptual analysis, or any combination of these will provide a satisfactory answer. Quote, a special sort of intuition is a lame answer, but it is the one to which the clear-headed objectivist, that's moral objectivist, is compelled to resort.
So this was the point that I actually wanted to talk about in...
I highlighted that for me, and I'm out of beer, so
maybe
you get what you're given.
But even so, I also wanted to talk about
That's
this.
a good point.
Because, so what Mackie's doing here is he's just going through the ordinary ways that we come to have justified beliefs about things.
That was me
And-
touching things and looking at things. And
So
seeing
it's
things.
like, okay, and the thing is, I mean, Mackie doesn't really explain what the issue is with any of these. He says none of them really work, but I don't know, it might just be worth saying something a little bit about why that would be. So he says, look, okay, on the one hand there's sensory perception, right? Touch,
Like,
taste,
it smells
smell,
bad.
sight.
Butt
Okay,
sex. That butt sex smells bad. That's not going to tell you it's immoral.
that depends on,
There is no need to go down that rabbit hole.
you just
No
introduced
pun
it.
it was something that a sensory perception tells you is bad,
Okay, so
that you dislike.
let's take the example of setting the baby on fire, right? There are lots
That
of things
might
I'm
smell
perceiving
good.
there.
I
It
don't
might
know.
do. Who knows? So yeah, there's lots of things we're perceiving there. We're perceiving the sound of the baby screaming. We're visually seeing flesh bubbling, I guess.
Which people who eat
Yeah.
meat are fine with somehow. I don't know.
So we're seeing, we're smelling all of these things, but it's like none of that is the moral value, right? I mean, ultimately, all we're doing is just describing something that's
That
taking
happened in
place
the
in the world. We're not perceiving the fact that it is not to be done. So
There's no wrongness in our physical
yeah,
perceptions.
it
of
seems
things.
like we could disagree completely on the moral value of an action, while agreeing entirely on the perceptual qualities of the action.
So, I mean, let's talk about instead, like pig roasts, for
Yeah.
example. So I grew up
This
in the
is a good
South,
example.
and they jammed a stick, rear through mouth, through a pig. It's dead, usually, as far as I know. And they make some slices, and they rub it in some stuff, and sometimes there's an apple in its mouth. I don't know, it horrified me as a child. But I was taking in the same sensory data as my redneck neighbors and family, and having a completely different reaction to it. My reaction was one of horror. This was just, I could see its face, man. It traumatized me. We're talking about when I was 5, so don't try to argue with me about this. I was 5, okay? And these people were salivating. They were very excited. So clearly our sensory perceptions are not particularly useful in this situation. They're going to fail us.
They get you the descriptive facts, but
Yeah.
not the prescriptive.
Yeah, it is true. We saw the exact same shit. We smelled the exact same shit. Maybe I shouldn't say shit. We saw the same things. We smelled the same things. We understood the same things about the situation. And I was horrified and disgusted, and they were enticed and tantalized.
So,
Senses aren't going to do it.
So I'm going to do it. So then he says introspection. Introspection is the capacity of observing one's own mental states. Essentially, like I can ask myself, what am I feeling right now? And maybe I'm feeling happy. Maybe I'm maybe I have some expectations about what will happen in the future. Maybe I'm
In my
anticipating.
case, maybe I'm feeling like I need to pee.
You need to pee. You need to. We better get a move on then. Okay, so yeah, we experience things going on in our own heads, our own mind. It doesn't look like that's really going to get you objective morality either. Like that can tell you how you feel about things. Okay, so you look
I
at
was
your
horrified
pig,
by the pig.
You're horrified, but you feel the horror. But like that's not.
That's just telling me about me.
Yeah. So that's just a personal
That's
reaction.
not going to work.
Framing and confirming of explanatory hypothesis. This is just what we do in science, right? When we try to figure out how the universe arose, and we say, okay, the Big Bang model is confirmed by the cosmic microwave background radiation.
So we look
right?
at our
Like
pig and we're like, we describe it, and we form a moral hypothesis.
So in the case of the Big Bang model, you make predictions, you confirm those predictions. It's not clear that you don't seem
What
to
are
do
you
that
going to
when
count the
with
number
moral
of people
hypotheses.
who are horrified by the
Yeah.
pig? Are you going to poll the pig before this happens and ask it how it feels about it? What are you going to do? There's no way to model it scientifically, so that's not going to work.
So then he says conceptual analysis. Conceptual analysis involves breaking down concepts, basically. Like the classic example is bachelor just means unmarried man. Like we're taking the concept of bachelor, breaking it down into its constituent parts. And that tells us that can tell us a lot about what moral statements mean. So this is the linguistic analysis part that Mackie was doing earlier, but that doesn't tell us anything about what's going on in the world. That just tells us about our concepts, our language.
And that, for example, the people eating this pig, I think it's called a pig picking, which is just really disgusting to me. Anyway, that will tell us that they think that it is okay, and I think that it is fucking horrifying.
And it will tell you, presumably it will also tell you what the term pig refers to.
Yeah,
and
so,
things like that.
and that has some, entailments in it. It's an animal, it's of a certain species, probably of a certain gender, although pig is not a gendered one. Sow, or, can't remember what that, boar. No, boar is just a wild one. So a sow would be a female one, right? There's certain content that's packed into our language, but that's not going to help us out in figuring out whether or not it's fucked up to do this to a pig. Is there another one, or is that the end of his list?
And that's Mackie's list, I think. And he says, or any combination of these.
Or any combination.
So again, it doesn't look like it. And so, this is the epistemological problem, right? It's the problem of, well, if there were these objective values, how the hell would we know about them? And the usual ways we have of knowing about things, Mackie thinks, just don't apply here, right? Like, the best we can do is to say, well, we just have moral intuitions.
I just feel ways about that pig.
I intuitively know that causing pain is wrong, or that I intuitively know that theft is wrong, or I intuitively
And I
see
intuitively know that
property
pigs don't count, but babies do count.
Maybe something
which
like
is
that.
fucking crazy. And this is why he says it's lame. Such appeals are lame and a travesty.
I don't know if you wanted to talk about the Plato thing.
I don't know. I feel like this is just a summary of what we've effectively said, but just because the end has to be pursuedness somehow built into it. Similarly, if there were objective principles of right and wrong, any wrong possible course of action would have not to be doneness somehow built into it.
Yeah.
So we need to understand that we're not talking about how we feel about the pig. We're talking about this is what it means for something to be objective, and that's why I highlighted it, because I really wanted to drive home this point. If you want to be a moral realist, somehow that pig picking, or polyamory, or whatever, would structurally have this objectively, mind independently built into it.
I think actually I did want to say something about that. So this idea that
my bladder has 2B bathrooms in it.
no, we can pause.
No, just continue.
Okay, so when we take the people roasting the pig, right? The idea is then, okay, it has not to be doneness, as Mackie says, somehow built into it. So, there's something about this, right, that provides people with a reason for action independently of how they feel about it, right? This is, I think, a key point. It doesn't matter whether or not you like eating pig, or it doesn't matter whether or not you care about the pig. If you're going to say that it's morally wrong to eat the pig, then you ought not to do it, regardless of your desires. And that's just generally the case, right? Like, I ought not to own slaves regardless of my desires, regardless of anybody else's desires.
Which is, again, why trying to approach this scientifically is not going to work. You're going to ask people how they feel about it. All you're going to find is how a majority or minority or plurality of people feel about it. And when we talk about objectivity, we're not asking how people feel about it.
Yeah. And the question is, like, okay, where does this reason independent of people's minds and desires come from, right? Like, my reason for not eating the pig that's independent of my desires.
Or eating the pig.
Or maybe it's morally good to eat the pig. In which case I would have a reason to eat the pig.
You'd be morally obligated to eat the pig, independent of whether or not, like, you were even hungry.
Yeah. It's not like you can just say, oh well, if I desire such and such, then I can eat the pig or not eat the pig. It's, I ought not to eat the pig regardless of my desires. And that's a key problem for Mackie.
I mean, that seems like a really big problem because you find yourself like obligated to do or not do things that make absolutely no sense for no reason, that are counterintuitive, and yet you appealed to intuition. I just liked this quote. Another way of bringing out this queerness, this strangeness, is to ask about anything that is supposed to have some objective moral quality. How is this linked with its natural features? And I think that's what you really wanted to talk about.
Did I? I mean, yeah. So
we can say
I
these
think,
things exist, right? This pig exists. It's on fire. It smells the way it smells. It's got these properties that we can observe empirically.
I feel like actually we've kind of made this point already, so I don't know whether I need to go into too much
There is a
detail,
problem of how that connects up to morality.
Yeah, so the issue is, all right, we have various natural properties about particular actions, right? Like I'm killing the pig, I'm roasting the pig, I'm eating the pig. Okay, killing the pig is presumably, going to be unpleasant for the
Maybe
pig.
you petted the pig at some point, I don't know.
But there's various natural properties. And Mackie's question here is, well, okay, if we assume there are objective facts, right, like how exactly are they related? Because as Mackie says, it doesn't seem to be a logical connection, right? Like it's not logically incoherent to say that some action causes a great amount of suffering and pain, but it's morally good, right? Like that would seem to be maybe that's a bizarre moral view to hold, but it wouldn't be like incoherent. We would understand what somebody's saying. It's not like asking someone to imagine a round square. So,
I mean, I think a better example is just to use like a morally neutral descriptive claim. So, Cain currently has the tablet, right? Now, how on earth could that connect to rightness or wrongness? We can examine that in, again, all our ways of examining it, and we're not going to find any kind of rightness or wrongness in it. And yet, in certain instances that we feel ways about, I don't know how else to put it, we want to say, like, no, that description connects to a moral property.
Yeah.
And that's just fucking weird. It's quite clear.
Actually, here's maybe another example that makes a point. So let's take water, right? Like water has the property of liquidity, okay? And then we can kind of zoom in on water and look at how it's structured. It's got H2O molecules, and actually there's like protons being exchanged. So there's HO and H3O and so on. There's polymers and all of that, and we can understand how the liquidity of water, like the liquidity in a glass of water, is produced by these by the underlying
properties and physical properties. Yeah.
And I think what Mackie's saying here is, well, it just is like we don't really have any kind of answer as to how the wrongness, let's say, of setting a baby on fire is connected to those natural properties of it, right? Like it's not logical connection.
We could infinitely describe it. We could provide a perfect description of it. And when we say perfect, we mean mathematically perfect. A complete description of this pig or flaming baby or flaming whatever you want.
Yeah.
We're on fire today. And none of those, again, a complete physical description. None of that would tell us the moral status of it.
So the wrongness must be somehow consequential on it. It is wrong because it is a piece of deliberate cruelty. But what in the world is signified by this because? That's the question. Like in the case of water and liquidity, right? Like it's liquid because of the underlying chemical process. We can give an answer there. And I think Mackie is...
Setting the pig on fire is wrong because it's a piece of deliberate cruelty. That doesn't follow as easily.
No.
So what exactly... Yes, we can use words to make these statements, but they don't actually seem to be doing any intellectual or philosophical or explanatory work for us. And now we've come to the end, I believe.
Well, there
The
was just a
last
bit
bit.
more on that, but I don't have anything more to say about that. I don't know if you do.
Yeah, so, and I mean, again, because this is a two-part argument, one is the descriptive fact of the matter about things, and the other is our way of knowing. It is not even sufficient to postulate. I've had a lot of beer. It is not even sufficient to postulate a faculty which sees the wrongness. Something must be postulated which can see at once the natural features that constitute the cruelty and the wrongness and the mysterious consequential link between the two. What do you have? Is it your pinky toe? I don't know. I would love to know. I'm receptive to hearing. I wanted to get to
This is the last thing I think.
the last thing that we wanted to talk about, because there is a must bathroomness in it.
Okay.
Would you? I would like to introduce it if that's okay. But I'm going to hand you the thing so
Okay.
you can ultimately read it. So look, I was once accused by my thesis professor of helping myself to moral language, and this was to say. Occasionally I would say like, this feels wrong, or especially with regard to aesthetics, I would use the language of beauty, and he said as an error theorist, which I, Kane, and Mackie all are, I should not. And I think a lot of people, like Sam Harris and some others who have messaged us, emailed us, and spoken with us publicly, the concern there is that you have to quit yourself of all judgments in order to be an error theorist. And that's not correct. And I think Mackie quite succinctly explains why in this quote. So own it, okay?
Okay.
Do it to it.
I actually can't just read the quote because it relates to something he says in the previous paragraph.
Well, son of a bitch, just read it. We'll link it.
Okay, so Mackie's talking here about our everyday moral language, right? Like when we say things like "you must do this," "you can't do that," or we use
That
terms
painting
like
is beautiful.
obligation, unjust, rotten, disgraceful, mean. So what he says is the objective prescriptivity, the element, a claim for whose authoritativeness is embedded in ordinary moral thought and language, is not yet isolated in these forms of speech, but is presented along with relations to desires and feelings, reasoning about means to desired ends, interpersonal demands, the injustice which consists in the violation of what are in the context the accepted standards of merit, the psychological constituents of meanness, and so on. There is nothing queer about any of these, and under cover of them, the claim for moral authority may pass unnoticed. So,
I mean,
look,
really,
Mackie
if
is
I
saying...
said, Kane, that is a dope shirt,
Yeah.
right? I'm helping myself to an evaluative statement.
But I mean, more than just that.
I'm still free to make that sort of
Yeah.
statement, even as an error theorist who does not believe that's objectively true.
I can actually say, essentially moral claims. I can say you ought not to set the baby on fire, and that might be because I can use that term to express just the conventional moral code of my culture, say, or I can use it to express a claim about means and ends. So it's prudential not to set the baby on fire, because if you set a baby on fire, you might get arrested.
Which is
and
where we're
that
going to
would-
start seeing hypothetical
Yeah.
imperatives crop up, right?
Like if you don't want to get arrested,
don't set the baby on fire. Nobody, we're completely, of course, we're
Yeah.
completely free to use those things and help ourselves to that language. And with subjective values, such as, that's a dope shirt, Kane.
Yeah.
I am free to do that. We know I'm expressing a subjective value, and there's no one denying that we have these subjective
Yeah.
value experiences.
Claims about desires and feelings, claims about the means by which you can best achieve your ends, claims about the accepted moral codes of your culture. Mackie and error theorists in general, fine with all of that stuff.
No problem with that. Please tell him he has a dope shirt.
The key,
My hair
the
is
key
excellent.
thing
Maybe not in
is-
this video,
I think
but
your hair
I
is
feel I
really
have
damn
excellent
good.
hair.
You do.
As an error theorist, I can just help myself to that statement. I have voluminous, amazing hair.
because
very hot right
it
now.
may be an expression of your personal taste. It may be an expression that your hair meets certain standards. Maybe you're at a show, like for
hair
judging
show.
hair, where they have certain specific
I
standards.
don't know
for
what
how
fucking
good hair.
world you live in.
I don't know, but like, look, there could be a beauty show where they say, okay, somebody with like thick,
Just, like, take it
long
down and
hair,
toss it
right?
around.
That's what we're looking for. So you can have all of that, like all of that's
This
fine.
is a dope background, despite the dope waterfall.
What Mackie is objecting to is the idea that there are certain values or certain things that ought or ought not to be done, independently of people's desires, independently of social convention.
There's no
That's what he's
denial
claiming.
that we have these natural desires, inclinations, tastes, preferences. That would be insane. And I wanted to emphasize that because that seems to be a concern a lot of people have, is that if you're going to acknowledge that objective morality simply does not exist, you have to give up all of value. And that's wrong. You just have to acknowledge that it's subjective.
Yeah, and I think that's all there is.
Is that all?
To be said
Can we high
for
five again?
J.L. Mackie. Yes, I think
And
that's it.
get another drink and bathroom.
Yeah.
All right, well, goodbye, YouTube.
Yep, that's it. Goodbye, everybody.